Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and people who watch my channel regularly and know my style, if you will, know that I like to simply feed a system and then put it to the back of the line, and then the next time it gets fed is when its turn comes up again. The other thing I like to do is try to recognize milestone days. When it's some sort of a round number, 100 days in service, 200 days in service, something along those lines. And the system that we're checking in on today just happens to fall onto the normal day that it was going to get fed anyway, and it just happens to be its 100th day in service. And the system is the one you see right here. It's a little bit different from the other ones because you could see it's two bins, one inside the other. The one on top is a more shallow container with some space underneath it, and it's also different. Besides being a shallow tub, it's also one that's got a bunch of holes in it so that I could be really generous with moisture. This is the European nightcrawler worm bin that we refer to as our castings boulders experimental system. And today on day 100, it's getting feeding number 8 after a 14-day interval between check-ins. So we're going to get it up on the system, see how they're coming along, give them some more food, and celebrate 100 days in service. So let's get to work. So now during the last check-in with these little guys, we noticed that the top covering newspaper was really going to pieces. It's hard to believe it's even here, seeing how much it has changed over the past 14 days. So we're going to be giving them a replacement top covering newspaper once we're all finished here. And something we did recently, oh boy, I see a couple mating flying insects right here. And I wonder if it could have something to do with the high degree of moisture we've been maintaining here in this system. I mean, it didn't seem like I had flying insects swarming at me when I opened up the system, but the presence of those two right there tells me perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea. In fact, it would probably be a good idea to sprinkle in a little bit of the mosquito dunks that I use to try to control flying insects in my worm bins. And I gotta tell you, the stuff's been working really well. Here and there I still see one or two flying insects, but I don't know, maybe those little guys just sneak in from outside. But if they were to try to mate and have offspring down here in the wormery, those offspring would not be able to survive past their formative age of just being a larva, because I think the mosquito dunks, the way it works, it just prevents the final stage of development of the flying insects. So the feeding zone was on this side. It was marked by this being on this side, and we decided a couple check-ins ago to go ping pong style. So 2 feedings ago we put watermelon on this side. We found a little bit of leftover last time 14 days ago, so the watermelon leftover bedding came out, was used to set up the last feeding on this side. The bedding we used was a napkin, and what they got last time was some lettuce and some cucumber bits. I think a little chunk of tomato was even in there. And I figured if we found any leftovers of that last feeding from 14 days ago, we could do the same thing again, is just to pull it out of here and keep it with the ping pong movement of the feeding zone getting moved from side to side each time. The other thing we noticed past couple check-ins, last time we saw 2 cocoons while we were exploring the system. I believe during the previous check-in we saw 1. And I did sort of notice how on, perhaps this one here too, maybe it's just a figment of my imagination, but the clitellum, that little bulge on the worm, seems swollen, and to me that means perhaps this worm has mated recently and will be dropping off a cocoon at some point in the near future. So I don't know if that's just, like I said, my eyes playing tricks on me, or perhaps me just being hopeful. But the fact that we saw cocoons in here past couple check-ins in itself, I think, is already evidence of the fact that our estimated population of only 134 worms that were thought to occupy this system when we first launched it could be on the rise due to worms mating. And once little baby worms start showing up on the scene, well, I would imagine that the feeding requirements for the system will increase as the number of mouths to be fed increases. So I thought I saw what appeared to be perhaps some leftovers, maybe not. Maybe it was just some leftover bedding from the last feeding. So that means any of that leftover watermelon that was still in here last time we came in, as well as the lettuce and cucumber that they got 14 days ago, has probably been depleted. I've had some people comment, well, at least I remember one person for sure commenting, and you know who you are, that as far as they're concerned, there's probably more worms in here than just 134. And I don't even know if that was due to the anticipation of breeding and reproduction, or if that was just thought to be the case either way. You know, in the very beginning, I was very concerned that the worms would not be able to make use of this environment. Because I guess the reason we call it the castings boulders is, in case any of you haven't been along for previous check-ins or don't know the history, I had taken my collection of finished castings, a few buckets of it, and went through all of it carefully with my screen, since much of it had just been harvested in such a way that it was depopulated using the migration method, and then the finished castings were simply put into storage without ever being screened or scrutinized in any way for debris or chunks. And that's how some of this stuff came to be, as far as a little collection of debris that I knew wasn't compostable materials. And the reason I kept this around was I guess because it was meant to serve as a reminder that all these little chunks of what I refer to as castings boulders were just little fragments of material that were so hard and stuck together and refused to break apart, no matter how hard I shook the stuff or rubbed the stuff or tried to crush them. The stuff just refused to break apart. And that's how I ended up deciding that, well, there's not much I could do with this stuff. I guess I could have just filled a hole out in the garden or something along those lines, but I figured, why not let the worms take a stab at it and see if they can reduce it down to a smaller particle sized stuff, which would be more in line with what you would normally expect as far as worm castings go. So just here on my ring finger, right here, there's a worm cocoon, and I wasn't really going too much out of my way to try to locate them, but that one just sort of appeared in front of my eyes, and I figured I would draw our attention to it, since that has been a little bit of a theme lately. And I'm starting to really, I think I tend to agree with the presumption that there's probably more than just the original 134 worms that were thought to occupy the system when we first launched it, because every handful of material in this system seemed to be full of worms. Lots of worms seem to have their clitellums bulging, suggesting to me that there might be some mating going on here. And cocoons, bulging clitellums, handfuls full of worms almost on every handful. All those clues seem to suggest to me that we are probably dealing with somewhat more worms here than just, 134, which is a good thing. So now I was just thinking, what do we use as bedding here? I would have liked to have used something down here. I thought that we'd end up with enough of this this stuff over here. Some of the old napkin that was used as the bedding for the feeding last time to lay in here. Sorry, I'm just kind of drawing a blank here because I didn't really prepare for this properly, but I did come down with a couple spare coffee filters. And to tell you the truth, I do have a pretty good sized collection of these things piling up, and every now and then I do feel like I need a coffee filter to serve as a feeding zone indicator, so I grab one off the stack, but there's got to be dozens of them sitting over there within easy reach. As much as I'd like to be working down my collection of napkins that I have from my mom's house, I'm thinking we're just going to use a few of these as the foundational bedding for today's feeding. And what they're getting today is a couple pieces of cantaloupe melon rind. And just judging from what they've done with the last feeding, and you know what? Let's not stop there. I got so much of these. Why don't we just use a couple more? There we go. I think that'll work out quite nicely. I think the worms will appreciate it. You know, a system that was built out of castings boulders was not built out of bedding. I mean, in the very beginning, not knowing if the worms are going to be able to even utilize the castings boulders as an environment to live in, I would always create a little haven of added bedding for them to live in. But I never really gave them much. Perhaps during these feedings we would leave a napkin for them. But the application of bedding in this system has always been very limited. So perhaps today, on day 100 of the system being in service, we could splurge a little bit. And so far I've thrown 4 coffee filters into the feeding zone. Perhaps today we'll give them 6. And as you saw in the beginning, we've been marking the feeding zone, the ping pong feeding zone, going back and forth across the bin from one side to the other with this little plastic container. So we'll keep to doing that, which means we don't need one of the coffee filters to serve as a feeding zone indicator. We'll just cover up the feeding zone with some of the castings boulders that we have within easy reach. Try to level off a little bit. And I think we're just going to keep to what we did last time, which is just skip the addition of any moisture, because this stuff is almost borderline muddy, even making me question if perhaps we would want to start thinking about letting the material dry off a little bit. It might not hurt, but I guess the whole idea behind keeping things super damp in here was that the castings boulders, being hard little objects that just wouldn't even crush or break or anything, would probably benefit from a good thorough soaking. And after the past 100 days of being soaked, I'm not even sure we're ready to call off that mission, so let's just keep at it. Keep up the high degree of moisture, not adding any moisture, but definitely not promoting the loss of any moisture through evaporation either. We'll just stick with what we've got in here, which is quite a bit already. And from what I could tell, the worms seem to be enjoying it. So that's it for our check-in with the 100-day-old European nightcrawler system, experimental system with the castings boulders, getting feeding number 8 after 14 days. And things look good as far as I'm concerned. So that's it for the check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.